Darling one, you were born from the sweetest love, cast from the fires of creation, burning bright into the making of your perfect constellations. Head high, my love, never let them diminish you. Stand tall in the power of your love. Break open to the thousands come before you, written in your heart with holy blood. Keep going, my love. Hold tight to the scripture of your inheritance, your dreams born from ancient stone. Weave your magic star of wisdom, breathing life into hollow bones. Courage, my love. Place pain upon your sacred altars. Grow seeds where life has become hopeless. Lend hands to those who fall and falter. Let love be life's greatest opus.
Welcome, beautiful soul. My name is Tara Brading, and I'm the creator of the Dreaming the Ancestors podcast series, where we talk about remembering and reclaiming ancestral stories, feminine wisdom, and earth magic. This is the 16th episode, and today I'm very excited to welcome Sam MacLaren to the podcast. Sam MacLaren is an academic, animist, and seer based in the UK. She's of Scottish and Irish parentage, but was brought up in the north of England. Sam gained a first-class honours degree in Celtic Studies with the University of Wales, Trinity St David in 2023, and studied Ritual and Religion and Prehistory with Oxford University from 2023 to 2024. She's dedicated to working with the spirits of the British Isles in an animistic capacity, using the mythology and archaeology of Britain and Ireland as signposts towards building reciprocal relationships with these spirits and reconstructing a more authentic practice, devoid of the romantic and inaccurate projections of modern Celtic inventions. She teaches people how to develop their own seership and animistic capabilities in person and soon to be online. You can find out more at www.Pretani.uk. I'm so honored to be here with Sam. Welcome to the podcast, and thank you for being here, dear one.
Hello, Tara, and likewise, I'm so pleased to be able to share this time and conversation with you. So thanks ever so much for inviting me.
Thank you so much. And as always, I'd love to begin this conversation with an ancestral honoring. And so I invite everyone here to close their eyes for a few moments and imagine that we're having this conversation in the flesh, heart to heart. And we're sitting on the ground around a great fire. And I invite us to really feel the spirit of this fire at the center of our circle, feeling the heat of the flames, hearing the cracking of the wood, feeling the spirit of the fire opening our hearts to be in conversation and share wisdom today, to really drop into the heartfelt connection we each have with our ancestors and with the land. Just like our ancestors throughout time, this is a true way of dropping into connection when we gather around the fire and we begin to listen and we share wisdom and stories from the heart. And so I invite all of us to feel this and imagine this gathering around the fire as we begin this conversation. And I'd like to honor and welcome in the ancient ancestors from the lands we now call Britain, the lands that were once called Albion, the land of the Pretani people. And I really honor these ancient ones and feel them gathering around us. And I'm reminded of the very first time I met these ancient ancestors at Stonehenge in 2012. And I remember the feeling of these ancient ancestors as they arrived, as they gathered around me at Stonehenge and made themselves known to me. And I felt this deep, deep wisdom, this memory moving through them of what it means to be connected to the land, in deeply, deeply animistic and heartfelt ways. And so I honor the medicine of these ancestors as they come close and guide this conversation. I honor those ancient ones who came to me in 2012 and gave me a very clear mission. So my heart is filled with gratitude, and I feel these ancestors now. And I'd love to pass over to you, Sam, to honor the ancestors in whatever way feels most alive for you in this moment.
I just want to say the short part of a prayer that I always use in this situation. So that is to honor and awaken the ancestors of my blood lineages, my spiritual lineages, and my land, sea, and sky lineages. And I invite them to sit with us, to guide us, and to speak through us. And with love and gratitude, we welcome them.
Welcome, welcome, beloved ancestors. And honoring all of the ancestors who are here with us, and inviting all of you listening to feel the presence of your ancestors, even in just a small way in this moment. The title of today's episode is Animism, Archeology, and the Ancient Pretani People of Britain. And there's a lot of interest at the moment in connecting with our ancient past and reviving the old ways of our earth-honoring ancestors, these ancestors that we have just invited into our circle. And because you're listening to this episode, I imagine that you're someone who feels this soul-deep calling to connect with these ancient ways and these ancient ones. And there's so much that we can learn from our ancient past. And I think there are some very valid reasons as to why people are hungry for this ancestral remembering. And Carl Jung said that when the dominant narrative of a culture begins to fail, people revert to older ways of relating to the world at large. And so, to me, it seems natural that we might look to our ancient past as we reimagine a different kind of narrative for humanity at large and for ourselves, especially in the face of all that's dying and being reborn in these deeply transformative times of heartache and change. And yet I also think that people can very much romanticize the past. And this is something that I can be guilty of too sometimes. And I really have to catch myself and ground into the reality of what we know about our ancient history and remember that there's also so much that we don't know. And something that I really appreciate about Sam's work is that she's very rooted in academic research, and her teachings are focused on being as accurate as possible to avoid romantic projections or misinformation. So this episode will help to demystify Britain's ancient past and peoples, offering really grounded insights into our native spirituality. And this understanding is what allows us to genuinely and accurately connect to our pre-colonial, pre-Christian, animistic ancestors. So if you're someone who enjoys learning about archaeology and history from an academic perspective, along with a good dash of spirituality and mysticism, this episode is for you. Sam, let's begin with a deeper introduction to you and your work in the world. And I understand that you had an awakening when you were 7 years old, which brought you onto a spiritual path from a very young age. And I would love it if you could tell us about this experience and how your path evolved from these important beginnings.
Of course. So when I was 7 years old, there were two really important things that stand out as happening in my life. And the first was very bizarre. So I remember going to the bathroom of all places, and I heard a voice in my head distinctly tell me, "The universe is a hologram. Nothing is what it appears to be. Look further than your eyes can see." So as a 7-year-old, I can tell you truthfully that I had no idea what a hologram was. I remember my father being very surprised when I asked him what it was, and he did his best to explain it, but at that time I didn't really understand. And he asked me who told me about them. And I remember saying, I think it was God, as this seemed to be the only reason in my mind at that time that voice could be speaking to me. I mean, I believe now it was like maybe a higher self or a guide. But at that time, that's the only frame of reference I had. And my father, ever the scientist, didn't know what to make of that response either, so we just never mentioned it again. And the second event that followed swiftly was I was guided to read a book by the children's author Susan Cooper, and the book was called The Dark is Rising. And I was really drawn to this book because of the cover initially, because it showed a man with an owl's face and antlers riding a horse. And that was the image that drew me. In fact, it mesmerized me, and I had to read it. And the story was full of British folkloric pagan themes, midwinter, wild hunt, otherworldly beings and places. And the story sort of transported me into that world, and it awoke something inside of me that I've followed ever since. And then around that time, I began to be haunted by spirits, and I understand them now, but it was quite frightening back then. But as a result of these experiences, I started searching for greater meaning, so looking for the magic. And in my teens, I ended up wandering onto the Wiccan path. And I enjoyed it very much for many years, but I could also feel there was something that wasn't quite right about it for me. And eventually I discovered it was a more modern invention. So I began looking for other more authentic paths. So this initially led me some years later to core shamanism, where I sort of stayed for many years. But then working with Indigenous people led me to look more closely at my own land and our practices. So I walked away from core shamanism and ended up doing some work with the Harvard Celtic scholar Sharon Pace-MacLeod. And this was a mixture of sort of academic study and shamanic practice. And then ultimately, this then led me to further educate myself, and I did my degree and my postgrad bits and had a number of uncomfortable realizations and revelations throughout that process, which has ultimately brought me where I am today. So it's obviously a very short summary, but it was a process that's been unfolding for 50 years.
I really appreciate your nod to those uncomfortable realizations. I've had plenty of those on my path as well, including the important uncomfortable realization that there's a lot of teachings available about Celtic paganism, Celtic spirituality. And I realized that this is actually not a very accurate way of looking at our lineages, our heritage, and that there's a lot of inaccuracies that are held within this umbrella use of the word Celtic and the amalgamation of different cultures and practices and what have you. And I know that you feel passionately as well about teasing out what Celtic really means, what it is, what it's not, and what have you. And as I spoke about earlier, it feels like there is this surge of interest in native spirituality from Britain, often under the guise of Celtic, and reviving our earth-honoring ways, right? The earth-honoring ways of our ancestors. And I'm really curious to hear your perspective of why you think people are drawn to these ancestral ways. Why are they drawn to Celtic paganism and Celtic spirituality and what have you? And what can people hope to discover on this path?
Well, I agree with Carl Jung. It's because the current cultural narrative is failing us. I believe that the rise of interest in our old ways is a direct response to the failings of materialism and the patriarchal sky god religions. So for our country, for example, it was the arrival of Christianity that, sounded the death knell for our spiritual connections. Essentially, over time, demonizing our relationship with the natural world and all the spirits that exist within it. So any kind of communication was punished, usually by a grisly death. Accusations of witchcraft and Satanism essentially made it impossible for people to have a healthy or comfortable animistic connection, which is, at the end of the day, our natural state of being. And what it also did was to take our focus away from being grounded and rooted in the land, from having a reciprocal relationship with the land spirits, and actually forced us to turn our eyes to the sky and put all of our focus on, well, essentially getting into heaven. The land and its denizens were forgotten or forbidden. We were taught that the planet existed solely for our benefit, that we were to have dominion over everything, that we were somehow superior in the eyes of a vengeful and jealous deity. And, even nowadays, and I'm not saying it's every church, but many churches are rife with discrimination, intolerance, and financial and sexual deviancy. And then, look at 300 years ago, materialism emerged from the shadows that had been lurking in and sort of came and finished the job. Because according to materialism, nothing has spirit. The inanimate is just that. There's a rational scientific explanation for everything. And the supernatural is just a childish fallacy. And, we've existed in that space, ultimately getting sicker and sicker. We're disconnected from the earth in our rubber-soled shoes, the insulated boxes we live in, disconnected from our natural diurnal rhythms because we have electric lights burning late into the night, no central hearth fire anymore because we have modern central heating, no more storytelling because we can be entertained in any number of ways with TV and internet. Our atmosphere is full of electrical noise from Wi-Fi signals, and our modern life just seems to be, to me anyway, about the worship of things and possessions over people and nature, and it's making us ill. So this rise of nature-based philosophies, I think, provides the antidote to all of it, that the earth is discovered to be a healing entity in her own right, and the re-establishing of our ancient relationships and the reconnection to our natural rhythms, our natural healing methods, and so on, helps us to recover and ultimately to care about the state of our world. And so thankfully, more and more people are awakening to this reality.
Yes, I love what you just shared. And it feels like in these times where we have so much technology around us as well, it's like everything's getting faster and faster and faster. And really, this is not natural for us. And so I can feel too that there's a slower pace of life that people are longing for. And it can be really difficult to find that slower pace of life in this fast-paced modern world we live in, this materialistic world. And so I can feel that this path offers a doorway of connection where we get to intentionally slow down as much as we possibly can. And that slowing down allows us to really listen and be present and actually connect with what life's truly about and connect with a pace that our ancestors understood, which is to be in sync with the earth, to live with the pace of the earth. This is something that I am practicing in my own life, and it's a struggle. There's a real tension there between what is demanded of us to, quote, survive in this modern world and the ways that our ancestors knew and understood, which is something so much slower and more meaningful. So there can be a real tension between those two different parts of self and those two different ways of life. And so it feels like more and more, these conversations are needed to help nourish that slower part, right? That ancestral part of us that knows how to be in right relationship and be in presence. So yeah, thank you so much for sharing, Sam. That was really beautiful to receive. And speaking of, the ancestors and this slower pace of life, I would love for you to give us a brief introduction to the ancient Pretani people of Britain. Who were these people? What does Pretani mean? Obviously, there's so much you could share about this, so I invite you just to share what feels most interesting or important from your perspective.
Okay, so this is quite a contentious subject, it turns out. So this is often the point where I both gain and lose a lot of popularity simultaneously. So I'm going to do my best to explain, though, and keep it succinct for you. So the Pretani were the tribes of people who collectively inhabited the islands now known as Britain and Ireland in pre-Roman times. So the name was first recorded by Greek ethnographers as early as the 5th century BCE. And the name Pretani is the origin of the Latin word Briton. Pretanice was the name of the island recorded by the ethnographers, which was later Latinized as Britannia. So the name Pretani has two possible meanings. It either means the people of forms or the tattooed people due to their alleged tattoos or body painting habits, but a more modern interpretation has emerged that it actually means supreme landholders. So you might ask, why is Pretanī a point of contention? And I'm just gonna give it to you straight, because the ancient Britons were not Celts. The Celts were a group described by various classical authors as inhabiting parts of what is now known as France and Spain. In all the classical accounts, the inhabitants of Britain are referred to as Britons and not Celts. And most importantly, nowhere in our literary record do the Britons ever refer to themselves as Celts either. And also, there's no word in our indigenous languages for Celt. Pretanī, however, does survive in both Brythonic and Goidelic forms. And here's the crunch, Tara. Like, nobody in Britain or Ireland ever referred to themselves as Celts until after 1707. So in 1707, the term was coined by the linguist Edward Lloyd to describe an ancient Indo-European root language from which all of our European languages may have evolved, including ours. So it was a linguistic term only, a hook to hang a theory on, and one that was never intended to be used to describe the people of these islands. And one of the common arguments I hear from people is that, well, the Celts came and settled in Britain and Ireland. Well, yes, some Celts did, in the far south of Ireland and the east coast of what is now England. However, just because some Celts turn up from the continent, it doesn't magically render an entire country and people Celtic and Celts any more than, pockets of Eastern European settlers here today suddenly turn Britain into, Poland or Czechoslovakia, for example. So what actually happens is that these settlers are then subsumed into the existing culture that they settle in, and not the other way around. And just to add to that, genetic profiling indicates that Britons have been existing on this island since the Mesolithic periods, which long kind of predates any ideas of Celts or Celtic. So the people of these islands were collectively Pretani, not Celtai. And furthermore, experts are now pretty certain that the term Pretani itself is insular in origin. In other words, it was the term used by the people to describe themselves.
Thank you so much for sharing. Every cell in my body is lighting up with this level of clarity because this level of clarity is not readily accessible.
No.
And I feel so grateful that you have just laid that out for us so simply and so clearly. And it makes perfect sense to me. Like, in my blood and my bones, I feel the truth of it. And also, it just clears up a lot of questions from things that I have read and researched over the years. And, while we can use the word Celtic in the modern day to describe certain things, because obviously it's something that is in our culture now, we're using it as a cultural word. If we actually go back to the roots, I love that we find actually that this word is not accurate at all.
No.
And that Pretani is the word that actually speaks to our, insular ancestors and in our pre-Celtic ways, right? Because we now see that Celtic is actually a very modern invention. So yes, thank you so much for that explanation. And in my own research of the prehistoric people in Britain, the Pretani people, I found that archaeology actually provides some really fascinating clues about our ancient ancestors. And when we cross-reference this with cultural beliefs and traditions and stories that have survived through the ages, there's actually quite a lot that we can interpret. And so I would love for you to tell us about some of the archaeological findings from Britain that you've come across in your research, as I know this is something you're passionate about, and what this archaeology potentially tells us about our Pretani ancestors and what they considered to be sacred.
Okay, so that's obviously a huge area because so many wonderful things have been unearthed. Like, for example, the Iron Age chariot burials. I love them. Men and women of status buried along with their entire chariots, their weapons, their finery, and they even have their horses buried with them, for example. So for me, it's really indicative of a very strong belief in a life beyond this one. Otherwise, why would you need these things? And then we have things like the foundation sacrifices, young men buried and quite possibly alive in the foundations of hill forts such as Danebury and Maiden Castle. And their purpose, possibly to guard and protect the tribe, or actually as an offering to the land for, granting permission to build on it. But I think what stands out for me most of all are the sheer number of ritual depositions made to bodies of water. And this practice is extremely ancient, and we have evidence of it dating back 12,000 years to the Mesolithic period. In fact, I believe that you made an Instagram post about it, the ritual depositions at Starcar in North Yorkshire, the antler frontlets, the headdresses, yeah? But there were other very important offerings made there too. Starcar has revealed the earliest ever example of a hunting bow, and also a digging stick likely used for uprooting tubers and plants for food or medicine. And these hunting and gathering items were deliberately and carefully placed in the waters. We also have countless examples of water depositions all over the island. So Llyn Bach in Anglesey being a wonderful example. The depositions there included weapons, shields and helmets, jewellery such as torque, neck rings and brooches. There was chariot paraphernalia, blacksmithing tools and cauldrons and cooking utensils. And these assemblages in water indicate that it was held in such great reverence by the ancestors that they were somehow aware of the living intelligence in water and its importance to all life. I mean, I don't know if you're aware of the work of Vida Austin today.
No, I don't think so.
Right. Vida Austin, she took over where Masaru Emoto left off, in regard to the intelligence of water. And she's shown beyond all doubt that water is alive and sentient. So yeah, for me, that's the standout thing is the reverence for water, and remembering also that, in the past, Iron Age and earlier, there was an awful lot more water in Britain and Ireland than there is currently.
Yes, I love that you have drawn our attention to these ritual deposits in water because, of course, in addition to the archaeology, we find so much water reverence within our cultural traditions, our mythology. Water has always been sacred to our ancestors and the different waves of people that came to Britain and Ireland through many periods of time. And we have the more recent tradition of well dressing, which is a beautiful continuation of those more ancient traditions, going all the way back to Starcar, as you mentioned. So yes, thank you so much for drawing our attention to that. And, based on this historical information we have from archaeology and our mythology and our cultural traditions, it seems really undeniable that our ancestors were animistic, especially pre-Christian, right? But even the remnants of that belief have survived through time through traditions like well dressing, right? So it seems undeniable that they were animistic. And for those of you listening who don't know what animism is or aren't quite clear about what this is essentially the belief and understanding that everything is imbued with spirit. And just to give an even more sort of clear or broader understanding of this, Sam, I would love for you to tell us about how our ancestors related to the elements. And I would love for you to tell us about the 9 elements of Britain and some examples of how these elements were honored.
Okay, so the 9 elements are an ancient Indo-European philosophy, which likely formed the basis of animistic belief systems in prehistoric Britain and Ireland. So the 4-element system in use today is, of course, of Greek origin and therefore not native to us. In terms of the 9 elements, there's a single reference in a 14th century manuscript attributed to the 6th century Welsh poet Taliesin in his poem The Battle of the Trees. And the single line states, "Of the 9 elements I am composed." The 9 elements in the Indo-European system are rock, earth, plants, water, wind, clouds, sun, moon, and sky. And the system also equates these elements to parts of the human body. So we have rock as bones, earth as flesh, plants as hair, water as bodily fluids, the wind is the breath, clouds are emotions, sun is the right eye, moon is the left eye, and sky is mind. So from an animistic point of view then, these elements convey a far, far deeper understanding of our connection to the natural world than just earth, air, fire, water. And you ask how our ancestors might have honoured these. Well, we can't know for certain, obviously, but we can make educated guesses based on surviving mythology, archaeology, and more modern folkloric practices. So what I'd like to do, if it's okay with you, is just to briefly address each element and how it might have been represented. Okay, so we start with the rock. So we see that in the megalithic structures, monuments like Stonehenge and Avebury, aligned in ways suggesting ceremonial or astronomical purposes. And certain stones and outcrops were also considered sacred, serving as focal points for rituals and gatherings. And then the second element of earth, we see this perhaps in agricultural festivals. So celebrations such as Bealtaine or Samhain honoured the cycles of Earth's fertility and abundance and death and rebirth. And I know you'll be familiar with this. Obviously, burial mounds, these earthen barrows and mounds constructed as burial sites, reflecting beliefs in the earth as a resting place for the ancestors and their memory. The third element of plants, well, obviously the ancients had a reverence for trees and groves, considering them sacred places of powerful spirits, and plants were doubtlessly used in rituals for healing and protection, with specific plants and herbs believed to possess healing or visionary properties. Water, well, we just talked about, bodies of water seen as conduits to the other worlds, with rituals performed to honour the water spirits and seek blessings, evidenced, as we've just seen, by the valuable depositions in rivers and lakes as offerings. The next one is wind. So the transmission of our stories and songs through the spoken word can be seen as an homage to the wind, carrying voices via the breath across the generations. The ceremonies were likely conducted to appeal to wind spirits for favourable sailing conditions or, bountiful harvests. And I know that Scottish folklore is absolutely full of stories of people petitioning and controlling the winds. The sixth element is clouds, so the movement of clouds and celestial bodies was likely monitored for omens, and we still do that. People still cloud read today. And those omens would influence agriculture and social decisions. And clouds may also have been associated with land spirits, air spirits, whatever, representing their presence or their moods. Now, the seventh element is the sun. So clearly events like summer solstice, honouring the sun's life-giving energy with gathering at sites like Stonehenge, and the bonfires during festivals such as Bealtaine, perhaps symbolising the sun's light and believed to purify and protect the communities. And the eighth element of moon, phases of the moon we know guided agricultural practices and the timing of festivals, reflecting its importance in daily life. And The moon featured in myths and stories and was quite likely personified as an intelligence that influenced the tides, fertility, and time itself. And finally, sky. We know our monuments were often aligned with celestial events, indicating a sophisticated understanding of the sky. On observing the sky's appearance, including stars and weather patterns, doubtless played a role in divinatory practices. So yes, that's a very brief roundup of the 9 elements.
Wow, so beautiful to receive that deep understanding. And, you communicated it so simply, but in a deep way. And it's so, of course, relatable. I mean, of course, our ancestors were connected to the elements and had reverence for the elements because the elements are the basis of life. And so this deep but simple remembering of how to be in communication with the elements and in, ritual, ceremonial ways of connecting to the elements is truly a way of connecting with the ancestors and our ancestral ways. And that slowing down we were talking about earlier of truly being in presence with the elements. And I often think of the elements as our first ancestors.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And they have so much to teach and offer. And this leads us beautifully into my next question, which is about the practice of animism. And I know that you've dedicated your life to animism, and I would love to hear about some of the teachings you've received and the wisdom you've learned since becoming an animist and relating to the elements in some of the ways you just described, and anything else you feel called to share about this pathway as a way of life.
As somebody with rampant ADHD, one of the most important things has been that of slowing down. Yeah. So as you identified, we live in this high-speed world of instant connection, instant gratification, the belief that we can get anything we want right now, including enlightenment, if we just throw enough money at it, with fast food, fast broadband, fast cars, etc., etc. And it's all a major distraction and highly detrimental to our mental health and well-being. So taking the time to slow the pace of life wherever we can, in whatever ways we can manage, is absolutely vital. And it's something that I am really having to force myself to do. I force myself to not pick up the phone as soon as I wake up in the morning, but to actually sit and meditate, connect with my guides, connect with my spirits, and importantly, connect with myself and my own body and how I'm feeling before I distract myself with, whatever device comes to hand. And another really important teaching, and I think it's really vital that we share this, is that we should not expect the spirits to welcome us with open arms, especially when we consider what we have done collectively as a species to the earth and our environment. It's quite naive to imagine that just because we've suddenly woken up and decided to return to the old ways of being, that these spirits are instantly going to forgive everything and offer their trust and friendship immediately. No, that's absolutely not the case. The rebuilding of relationships and trust, in my experience, can take months. And sometimes some spirits want nothing to do with us, and that needs to be respected. But fortunately, due to my persistence, I normally manage to win over any resistance, because that resistance is often rooted in fear and can be overcome by heart-centered conversations and lots of offerings. So those are like the two kind of main bits of teaching I wanted to share at this point.
Yes, and what I really receive from that share is the importance of slowing down so that we can be in right relationship and not expect an instant relationship and not expect the spirits to pander to our whims and desires.
Mm-hmm.
And that there's actually that slower pace is what allows us to build true relationship.
Exactly.
Yeah, and something that I found too on my path is that there are certain spirits that I'm destined to be in relationship with. And I say that in that way of being in true relationship and putting in the work and what have you. And, for me, it's been a beautiful process to identify which particular spirits I feel a close connection with and I feel a sense of destiny with. And it has been such a privilege to be on this path of discovery, to feel and understand over time which spirits I'm actually destined to be in relationship with.
Yes.
And to form deep relationship rather than flitting from this element and this spirit to that element and that spirit, to actually feel a sense of relationship, because, it's difficult to be in relationship with all the spirits in a deep way. So yeah, that has been a really important part of my path. Bridging the gap here from our experiences, Sam, to, the experiences of those listening. For anyone who is longing to walk a path of animism and ancestral remembering, could you give some examples of simple practices that people can do to weave into their everyday lives so that they can begin to feel some of these connections for themselves?
Of course. So, on a lighter note, the first important thing that I say to people is become comfortable with the general public thinking you're a complete lunatic, because animistic practice can look a little odd to the casual observer. Yeah, so the first practice I really recommend is taking your shoes off, right? Let your feet connect to the energy of the earth, because doing so will bring your own electromagnetic field into harmonic resonance with the planet, and thus animals, birds, insects, and spirits will cease to regard you as such a threat. And also, earthing in this way is extraordinarily good for our health, and it's been shown to actually cure certain ailments associated with our modern disconnected life. So it's a really important practice. I go walking every morning out on the land barefoot, come rain or shine. And it's beautiful. It really helps to foster that connection with the all. So the next thing that I would suggest people do is talk out loud. When you're out walking in nature or even sitting in your garden, speak to the land spirits. I advise people speak from the heart. Tell them your name. Tell them you want to make peace and friendship with them. Tell them of the story of your separation from them as you understand it. Approach them the way you would if you were wanting to make friends with another person. So politely, slowly, and ask them how you can heal your disconnection from them. Ask for signs that you've been heard, because eventually you'll get them. It might take days, weeks, or even months, but it will happen. And the next thing is to recognize the animistic spirit of your own home. So to connect with it, honor it. Ask it if it needs anything from you to make it more comfortable. And thus, you will become more comfortable. Your home is a living spirit that can improve your health and well-being if you communicate with and honor it. And lastly, the big thing for me is the practice of making offerings. So every time you go out to commune, leave offerings. So traditionally here in the British Isles and Ireland, our offerings are things like hazelnuts, apples, oats, honey, butter, cream, mead, and precious metals like silver and gold, and clear quartz crystals too. And offerings of songs and stories are also wonderful. And a good rule of thumb for people to remember is that foodstuffs go on the land and metals and crystals can be offered to water.
Thank you, Sam. Once again, I love your simplicity and clarity, because there's a depth to what you've shared, but you've made it so simple for people to actually, walk forward from this conversation and have practices and to understand the rootedness of where these practices come from. So thank you very, very much.
You're welcome.
And I'd love to give you an opportunity just to share anything else that you feel called to share to finish this beautiful conversation.
Well, I was thinking about that, and it's not a long share, but I think the most important thing for me is to remember that my animism is not something I do. It's what I am. It is my life. I am the earth, as the 9 elements teach us. So every aspect of my life is in relationship, is practicing my animistic connections. And I think that once we really appreciate the real aliveness of everything and live with that as a philosophy, our entire view of everything transforms.
Yes. I love that beautiful reframing, because once again, it's so against the grain of our dominant culture, where we're a culture of doing and doing and doing. And to really feel that actually our practice of animism is more about being than doing, there's a softening I can feel within myself that opens to the innate presence that comes from being in these relationships, and how it's something that, we practice, of course, and we put work into, but there's an innate beingness to it that isn't about doing and doing and doing and doing, that there's something much more organic and much more rooted in presence that feels so nourishing to the soul.
Yeah, exactly.
And Sam, this feels like a great moment for you to share a little bit about where people can find you and any projects you're working on and anything else that you'd like to share about your offerings and your work in the world.
Okay, yes, sure. So people can find me on Instagram if they so desire under Pretani Wisdom Traditions, and on the website, as you mentioned, so www.pretani.uk. So projects I've got going on at the moment, currently working on my first book, which is The Medicine of the Four Directions, Ancient Signpost, Modern Path. This is a working title. And it's an exploration of an old Irish cosmological model, which seems to function beautifully as a kind of, medicine wheel, I guess. It's something that I've been exploring and working with for the last 10 years or so. And it's proved to be absolutely, totally life-changing, incredibly powerful. So I teach in-person workshops on this model, but I'm also currently transferring it into an online format so that people in other parts of the world will be able to access it. I also teach a year-long seership training based around the mythology and folklore of the British Isles and Ireland. Again, those details are on the website. And finally, I'm developing another online course, which is an introduction to domestic animism, how to walk the path in the 21st century. So yeah, busy times.
So excited, Sam, to hear about all of these amazing projects and all of the things you're launching into the world. And I hope that those of you listening will go and look Sam up on Instagram and look at her website and all that she has on offer. I can really feel the deep rootedness of what you offer, Sam, and the integrity. So honoring you and honoring your work in the world.
Thank you so much. Likewise.
Thank you, Sam. Thank you, everyone who is listening, has been listening to this beautiful conversation. And I'd like to take a moment to thank the ancestors that we called in at the beginning of this call. Just taking a moment to close our eyes and reimagine ourselves sitting around that ancestral fire. Really feeling the warmth of those flames, feeling how we have been nourished through this conversation, feeling how the fire has really received this wisdom and also shared its wisdom in return as we have gathered around this ancestral fire to really share the wisdom of our ancestors. And I'd like to especially honor the Pretani ancestors, these ancient ancestors of the land, and honoring all of the ancestors who have chosen to gather with us today. Thank you, beloved ancestors.
Thank you.
Thank you all so much, and sending you so much love wherever you are in the world. I hope that you've enjoyed this conversation with us today.
You've been listening to Dreaming the Ancestors with Tara Brading. My passion is connecting women to the wisdom of their ancestors, specializing in ancestral feminine wisdom from Ireland and England. If you feel called to connect with your Irish ancestry in an embodied, spiritual, feminine way, I lovingly invite you to sign up for my free reclamation journey, which includes a 90-minute video to connect with your Irish ancestry and ancient heritage. And if you hear the call to connect with your English ancestry, I have a 3-hour introductory workshop called Women of the Wells. You can find these offerings at tara-wild.com/get started. To spell that out, that's TARA-WILD.com/get started.